Bible prophecy is active and unfolding daily. Zechariah 12, Isaiah 17, Ezekiel 38. Here is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's newscast. There's a shift in Saudi media's attitude to Israel. And this report comes from Memory. Iran's military involvement in the region is perceived by Saudis as an existential threat to their country. Israel, on the other hand, as aligns with Bible prophecy, of course Ezekiel 38 and 39, is not perceived as a threat to Saudi Arabia, but as a potential ally in the struggle against Iran. Against this backdrop, Saudi intellectuals, journalists, and writers have been increasingly expressing open support for Israel, even calling to normalize relations and make peace with it. Saudi liberal thinker Turki al-Hamad placed the responsibility for the deaths of dozens of Israeli Arabs in the confrontations on the Gaza border on Hamas and Iran. He wrote on Twitter this past May 14th, quote, "The whole thing was an Iranian maneuver carried out by Hamas at the expense of the children of Gaza, and this is unacceptable," close quote. Saudi businessman Khalid al-Ashera tweeted on the same day, quote, "Examining Zionist history, we find no bombing of our mosques, no targeting of the sacred compounds in Mecca and Medina, and no incitement against us. They haven't attacked us or supported our enemies," close quote. Turning to my personal thoughts, one of our mishpacha, our family, Shelley, sent me a text on Vimeo last week asking me to check out Messianic Rabbi Steve Berkson via a link to an 11-minute video where he makes a most amazing point, my friends. I mean, if you watched last Saturday's Walking in the Word, as well as last Thursday's live stream fellowship, I've been talking about the wheat and the tares maturing, and how one of the true colors of the tares that we can readily recognize, if we have eyes, ears, and hearts that see, hear, and understand, is the lying that they do without seeming to notice that they are lying. In fact, I think it was in the Walk in the Word where I said, I don't think they know they're lying. Then I watched this video that Shelley sent me to look at, and Steve Berkson talks about this very same thing in a video that he made 2 years ago. And of course, I have a link for you below. Please watch. But he said, clearly, they don't know that they're lying. Now, as of this Thursday's live stream, I am changing the name from live stream to live fellowship in the interest of a much more appropriate title, because that's what it has blossomed into, my friends. This beautiful gathering and a fellowship where we get together and we're fellowshipping live. Now, we've enjoyed that, and it has blossomed into a fullness where others have been asking, can we do a word study or study one of the books? And I thought, yeah, it's perfect now. Let's move it up to a new focus where, whether we do a book study or, a word study like last Thursday, I focused on women and their authority and their positions in accordance with Elohim's hierarchy plan for his Malchut, his kingdom. It's kind of a word study. some amazingly interesting things came out of that I never noticed before, where Abba Father, and you have to know the original language to see this, but he talks about women in power and how they mess up. But in the original language, it's not just women that he's talking about. He's also talking about men that act like women. In fact, he talks about women and children in, political positions. Well, there's children, He's talking about women, men who act like women, women who act like children, men who act like children. I've seen some men acting like real children lately. And of course, we've all seen men acting like women. But it's just an interesting study. Now, Caregiver and I have both been praying for an answer regarding what our study will focus on this Thursday. But as of right now, it turns out, I don't know nothing. I prayed on it. I'm not getting an answer. So we all don't know nothing until Thursday. We'll get together and we'll see what happens. However, I think it might have something to do with a continuation on the recent revelation that Elohim has been giving me about the wheat and the tares. It's just becoming so obvious, and we're all seeing it. Real surprising, the tares are not true believers. And Yeshua says, let them grow up with the wheat. Let the unbelievers grow up with the believers. And when harvest time comes, the maturity of the wheat, as well as the maturity of the tares, will make it real obvious who the believers are and who the unbelievers are. And it's surprising. Now, might have to cover this on Thursday. I mean, Yeshua said, look, many are going to come up to me and say, look, I spent my whole life teaching your word, prophesying, healing, everything, you name it. And Yeshua looks at him and he says, go away from me. I never knew you. You were never intimate with me at all. There are many, many, many who were calling themselves believers, and they're doing it in their own personal works. They're doing it in the flesh a lot, and they've gotten really good at it. A lot of people are fooled by them. But I think we are entering harvest time, and the maturity of the wheat and the tares is beginning to show. And keep your eyes open, my friends. I think we're going to see some surprising revelations going on across the board. At any rate, I'm thinking maybe that might be the focus. I don't see Abba steering me any other way. Now, if you don't know what I'm really talking about with this wheat and tares thing, watch my Walk in the Word and our live stream videos from the past 2 weeks, because I think it started burgeoning, coming out of me then. At any rate, join me and Caregiver this Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll all take it from there. Turning to wars and rumors of wars. From the Wall Street Journal, the Syrian regime is disguising Iran-allied militias as its own fighters in order to try to avoid further Israeli airstrikes against the Iranian targets in Syria. Military convoys of Lebanese Hezbollah fighters and other Iran-backed militias are advancing in both Daraa and Quneitra provinces in southwestern Syria near Israel's border, dressed in Syrian military uniforms and under Syrian flags. Talk about liars. And of course, Israel sees an Iranian presence on its border as a potential existential threat. Well, on Wednesday, June 6th, from the Iraqi news, at least 130 people were killed and wounded in a deadly explosion near a Shiite mosque in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. 2 bombs went off near an ammunition cache placed in a Shiite mosque in the Shiite bastion of Sadr City in Baghdad, leaving 20 people killed so far. Then on Friday, June 8th, from the New York Times, IDF soldiers were fired upon at least once from northern Gaza. In Nahal Oz, east of Gaza City, the commander of a company of snipers said that 4 bombs or grenades had been hurled at his men. Then on Sunday, June 10th, from Israel Hayom, Lebanese media reported that Israel has provided the UN with evidence that Hamas operatives have been training in Hezbollah bases in southern Lebanon. The reports also said that Israel has told Lebanon that it will be held responsible for hosting groups that are hostile toward Israel or that pose a threat to Israel's security. Then on Monday, June 11th, from the Middle East Eye, deadly clashes erupted overnight as fires attacked 2 besieged government-controlled villages in northwestern Syria. The villages of Fua'a and Kafreya represent a tiny pocket of government-held territory in Syria's northwest Idlib province, which is otherwise almost entirely controlled by various militants and hardline rebels. Now turning to our Intifada update from the Times of Israel. After weeks of setting fires in Israel using incendiary kites, Israeli Arabs are now using a new arson tactic: helium balloons. In total, 4,300 acres, or nearly 7 square miles of land, have been burned in more than 250 fires over the past 2 months, more than half of it in nature reserves. And the blazes have wreaked havoc on local wildlife, and there are more fires every day. The pilot program I reported weeks ago, using drones to take down incoming kites and balloons, has not succeeded in blocking the attacks. Now, also from the Times of Israel, the Palestinian medic shot during clashes along the Gaza border last week was no angel of mercy. The IDF released a video showing Razan al-Najjar lobbing a smoke grenade toward Israeli forces. The video included an interview she gave to an Arabic news outlet saying, "I'm here on the line being a protective human shield." Close quote. An IDF general posed an appropriate question saying, quote, "Do medics in other countries throw bombs and participate in riots and refer to themselves as human shields?" Close quote. On Tuesday, June 5th, from the Jerusalem Post, incendiary kites launched from Gaza sparked fires in 10 locations in Israel. Jewish National Fund World Chairman Daniel Attar said, quote, "It is inconceivable that the international community would allow Hamas not to be held accountable and pay for its criminal acts, not only against the citizens of the State of Israel, but also against nature and the environment, which have been severely hurt by this criminal environmental terrorism." Close quote. Then on Thursday, June 7th, from Ynet News, the IDF began dropping warning leaflets across Gaza as residents prepared to stage mass border confrontations on Friday. The IDF leaflets warned residents to stay far from the Israeli border, to refrain from attempting to breach or damage it, or carry out terror attacks against Israeli civilians or security forces. At the same time, Hamas has urged Gaza residents to take part. Then from the Jerusalem Post, residents of Israeli communities near the Gaza border will begin a massive tree planting campaign this week in response to the destruction that has been caused by incendiary kites from Gaza. The Jewish National Fund will supply thousands of tree seedlings. The arson kite attacks have dealt a blow to local agriculture as well as to large areas of forests and national parks. There were at least 9 fires ignited within 40 minutes in the Be'eri forest on Thursday. Then on Friday, June 8th, from the Wall Street Journal, Israel's military said about 10,000 Israeli Arabs gathered in 5 locations along the border fence, throwing pipe bombs and rocks at Israeli forces. They also launched a flaming kite with a device attached that exploded in the air. Israeli forces responded with riot dispersal means. Gaza's health ministry said 4 people were killed and 117 were injured by live fire. The gatherings were much smaller than the last big protest on May 14th, which drew 40,000 people, but that in no way diminishes the violence, my friends. And now looking at our review of last week's news, there's been a shift in Saudi Arabia's attitude towards Israel that further strengthens the truth of Elohim's Ezekiel 38 and 39 prophecy. The Syrian regime is disguising Iran-allied militias as its own fighters in order to try to avoid further Israeli airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria. At least 130 people were killed and wounded in a deadly explosion near a Shiite mosque in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. IDF soldiers were fired upon at least once from northern Gaza. Lebanese media reported that Israel has provided the UN with evidence that Hamas operatives have been training in Hezbollah bases in southern Lebanon. Deadly clashes erupted as fighters attacked 2 besieged government-controlled villages in northwestern Syria. After weeks of setting fires in Israel using incendiary kites, Israeli Arabs are now using a new arson tactic, helium balloons. Incendiary kites launched from Gaza sparked fires in 10 locations in Israel. The IDF began dropping warning leaflets across Gaza as residents prepared to stage mass border confrontations on Friday. Residents of Israeli communities near the Gaza border will begin a massive tree planting campaign this week in response to the destruction that's been caused by incendiary kites from Gaza, and Israel's military said about 10,000 Palestinians gathered in 5 locations along the border fence on Friday, throwing pipe bombs and rocks at Israeli forces. And that, my friends, is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Abba willing, I'll see you here again next week. Until then, keep your wicks trimmed. Keep your lamps burning bright. Shalom, my friends.
Crowded rooms, I need more space than I consume. up his time alone with you underneath a naked moon, sharing confidential moods and making chatter. Mockingbird nocturnal sings notations of eternal things, entering the quantum breeze, flying not for want of wings. He lights his gaze on you and me, simply because we matter.